What's going on, everybody? This is Darwin to Jesus, and I hope you're all doing well. So, I wanted to make this video today responding to this debate that Jordan Peterson had with 20 atheists over on Jubilee. And I thought that we could just go through it and I could give my thoughts. Before we actually get started, I just want to give a few thoughts on Jordan Peterson that I have. So, overall, I know that Jordan Peterson is a very controversial figure, but in my view, he's done a lot of good for young men. He's given them something to believe in, and he's made a lot of young men think seriously about God, which I think is very valuable. So even if Jordan Peterson is not yet a Christian, I do think that he has ultimately been a force for good and moved men, especially young men, in the right direction. And I really appreciate him for that, even if he never ultimately becomes a Christian. So this is him representing Christianity against 20 atheists. And I don't know how long we're going to watch this for, but we're going to watch it for a while. I'll give my thoughts and let's get into it.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim: atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
So is it 20 atheists or is it 25? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I count 20 or 21, but it says 25. It just said 25, but the title says Jordan Peterson versus 20. So it seems like they never know if it's 20 or 25, and I count about 20. But anyway, it's not that important. So let's talk about Jordan Peterson's first claim that atheists don't really know what they're rejecting. And Jordan Peterson has an interesting definition of God, but I do think that overall he's very correct here, because in my experience, I deal with a lot of atheists, and it is the case that most of them don't really understand what God is. And they'll say that they don't understand because they always ask you for a definition, and they say, well, you mean this by God, but so-and-so over here means this by God. So I don't even know what God actually means because everybody seems to have a different definition of what God is. So I think a lot of atheists should actually agree with Jordan Peterson when he says this. I also think that what God is not that difficult to understand, because ultimately God is a mind. If there's no mind that is responsible for everything, then there's no God. Full stop. Okay? It's very simple. And if there is a mind that is responsible for everything, then atheism is false and God exists. I don't know what else God could have other than a mind that would be truly God in what we mean by God when we talk about God. And I understand there's pantheists and they talk about how God is just like reality or whatever. God is the world, stuff like that. And they're not talking about something mental. And yes, that's fine. But generally speaking, like pretty much overwhelmingly, when we talk about what God is, we mean that there's a mind. We don't mean that there's just reality or something and all is one or something like that. We mean that there's a mind that's responsible for everything. So pantheism is really atheism in my view. I don't know how you can say that it's not, because there's no mind ultimately that's responsible for everything. It's just everything is all one, but that's not a conscious thing. It's an unconscious, non-mind sort of thing as far as I understand it. And if it is a mind, then that would be God. All right, so I definitely agree with Jordan Peterson's first claim here, and let's see what happens.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
So it's an interesting point, and a lot of atheists do like to say this. They'll say, well, I was a former Christian, or I've studied Christianity, or I went to seminary, these sorts of things. But there's a difference between knowing about something and knowing what something is. For example, imagine reading about love. Like you read romance novels or whatever, and it's always talking about love. Could you ever actually understand love in its fullness if you've never been in love and you've only read about other people and their definitions of love and their experiences of love? Would you ever fully understand what love is and what it is to love? I would say no, you wouldn't, because there's a dimension there. It's the most important dimension, which is experience. So do you think that this young gentleman here has ever experienced God? I would say no, it's very unlikely. Because once you do have a real experience with God, there's no going back. Okay? There's no going back because you know how good God actually is. So maybe he understands the technical definition of what God is according to the Catholic Church, but I don't think that he actually understands what God is in any sort of full or experiential way. But let's go ahead and listen to a little bit more.
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How
Atheists love talking about the no true Scotsman fallacy. They bring it up in almost every conversation, it seems like, that I have in general. It's brought up quite a bit. And I don't think that most of them really understand the no true Scotsman fallacy, because if somebody like molests children and they're calling themselves a Christian and you say, oh, they're not a Christian, then they try to throw that out. Well, it's a no true Scotsman fallacy. And it's like, well, is it though? If Christianity is very much against molesting children and there's somebody that is molesting children, are they really a Christian? You know, like imagine if somebody's calling themselves a vegan and they eat meat every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you say you're not really a vegan. Is that the no true Scotsman fallacy? Is it? So obviously the answer to that would be no. It is not the no true Scotsman fallacy. But you can't really get atheists to understand that.
How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's all
Yeah, I do want to chime in here really quickly. So it's an interesting point. How can you claim to know something about other people's mental states? And a lot of atheists say, how do you know what we know? How do you know that we believe in God secretly and this sort of thing? And it's just because of the way that the atheist lives for the most part. And it's because of what Scripture says. So if I believe that what Scripture says is true, and Scripture says that everybody ultimately knows that God exists, then I believe that. But also, no atheist lives as if atheism is true. They're all using laws of logic. They're relying on their brains or their minds as if it is reliable. These sorts of things. They're assuming that there will be uniformity of nature. They're assuming that morality is true and that there really is a right and a wrong. So all of these things tell me that the atheist does in fact know that God exists, because if no God existed, then all that stuff goes out the window. There's no reason to trust in your faculties. There's no reason to think that the universe is going to remain the same in the future as it has been in the past, these sorts of things. All that goes right out the window. So I don't believe that there is any genuine atheist in existence. But anyway, let's keep going here.
obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is
Yeah.
a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but
Yeah.
my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who is religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have
See, that should have been acknowledged because that's very true. There are a lot of people that are very upset with Christianity because they've had bad experiences, mostly with their parents, but also with the church. There are a lot of people with church hurt. And I think that's why we see such vitriol by so many people that call themselves atheists against Christianity, because it really doesn't make sense to be so vitriolic against Christianity if there isn't hatred, or if there isn't some sort of like deep wound that was inflicted by someone calling themselves a Christian and this sort of thing. It really doesn't make sense. I mean, if I don't know very much about Buddhism, right, and I get hurt, or it would be very strange for me to like hate Buddhism. Even if I did know a lot about it, it'd be strange for me to be super vitriolic against Buddhism, right? The only way that that would make sense is if I had a personal experience with a Buddhist, or there's something about that religion that harmed me, so now I have a vendetta. And most atheists, especially online atheists, act like they have a vendetta against Christianity. So I think Jordan Peterson is very correct on that. But most atheists refuse to admit that they do have a vendetta or that there's any kind of personal hurt. You usually have to get to know them for quite some time before they might even consider admitting something like that.
Have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all powerful, all perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the
He's trying to bring up that there are different interpretations of a story. This is something that atheists bring up all the time. And it's like, okay, but what's your point? I mean, we can't believe anything about the Bible because different people interpret it differently. I mean, there's different interpretations of everything. Name one thing that everybody all agrees on that there isn't different theories about. Name one thing that everyone agrees on. Name one. You can't do it. So, and yet atheists act like there actually is a truth and they can figure it out, even though there's nothing that all humans agree on. So it's just a really silly thing he's trying to do right there. And I see this constantly with atheists, them trying to do this. Like if everybody doesn't agree, then we just need to throw it all out or something. And they don't believe that. It's just a bad argument.
confines of the story, obviously. But
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has agreed or everybody has disagreed historically on. It seems like even the most benign detail about a book this big, and it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So
Yeah, see, he's still trying to make that same point. A bunch of people all disagree about it, so therefore we can't have any idea of what it says. I mean, how many people do you think would all get his exact meaning right there, what he's saying? Do you think everybody in the world would listen to what he just said and all agree about what his meaning was? And if they don't all agree, should we just say that there's no meaning to be gotten there? Or would we say that there is a truth and the people that don't agree with me are simply wrong? I mean, what's the point of even communicating anything if we can't communicate or convey a meaning unless everyone gets what we're trying to say? So if the Bible is not crystal clear and everyone universally agrees on exactly what it means, then I guess we just have to throw it out. Is that the argument here? You need to be very clear with atheists when they bring up this sort of argument, that they don't believe the argument that they're making. And if they did, it would be self-refuting. It would be self-refuting, because we shouldn't be listening to what they are saying, because people are going to disagree about their meaning. I guarantee it. So let's continue.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm saying
is
that we
he's
can't
good.
know because we
that's-
can't talk to those
look,
authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's
We can't know. Let me hang on.
nothing,
I'll pause it in a better spot there for Jordan Peterson. We can't know what the authors meant because we can't talk to the authors. I mean, what's the point of ever reading a book then? I mean, we should only read books when we can talk to the author afterwards and say, hey, did you mean this or did you mean that? Do you think that this guy only reads books by authors that are still living, and then he goes and he talks to them and he makes sure that he knows what they meant? I don't think he does. I'm pretty darn sure he does not do that. So, I mean, it's just such a bad point in my view.
thing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
And
you
we
have-
also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
the core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I
know.
said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality.
So I actually really like this point that Jordan Peterson is making right here. I think that he's absolutely correct. The divine is unknowable for us. And a lot of atheists refuse to understand this, and they say that you're arguing that God is mysterious. But God is mysterious. That absolutely follows. If there is an all-knowing being, a being like God, he would be extremely mysterious to us. We would not be able to comprehend him on his level. Now, could he communicate things to us on our level about our worlds or about this world? Yes. But could he communicate to us what it is like to be him and what he sees? Absolutely not. Could you communicate to an ant what it's like to be a human? No, because an ant is not a human. An ant has a very different understanding of reality than a human does. A human is far, far more advanced than an ant. You also can't communicate to a dog what it's like to be a human. Maybe a dog can understand certain things. It understands what it's like to eat, and it can do a little bit of reasoning, very simple reasoning. It understands a little bit about emotions and these sorts of things, but it's not going to understand things like justice, right? Or mercy, or high-level mathematics, right? It's not going to understand anything about those things. So what are all the things that God would understand that we wouldn't? It would be very difficult to even comprehend. I would say impossible to comprehend what God can comprehend, because we are not God. So of course God would be mysterious, and to be able to comprehend God, would probably be, I mean, if it were possible, it would probably be very damaging to a human being because we're just not able to hold that sort of information within ourselves. So it's very interesting that God only shows a teeny tiny part of himself to Moses in that story that Jordan Peterson is bringing up. I think that that would actually be very consistent with what we would expect if God did in fact exist, which of course he does.
Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity. And
Yeah, so how is this relevant? I mean, this whole storm god thing is just pure cope in my view. Even if it were the case that the Israelites or whatever at one point, it wouldn't be the Israelites either. It would be like the people before Abraham, because Abraham already believed in Yahweh. That's why he did what Yahweh said and everything. But, if there were a group of people before Abraham that believed in some sort of storm god, their understanding of what God is could, of course, change, right? So I don't change as a parent to my children. I don't necessarily change. Right now, they see me as being very, very strong and very wise, and I can tell when they lie. But do you think that their perception of me is always going to stay the same? Or do you think it's going to change as they learn more about me and as they grow and their relationship with me deepens? Do you think they're always going to find me to be extremely strong and tough and all of these things that they may or may not think about me? It's going to change. As they get older, they're going to understand more about who I am. That doesn't mean necessarily that I have changed. It just means that their perceptions of me were incorrect at first. And as they got to know me longer, things change. Their perception changes. Doesn't mean I changed. So even if there were a group of people that had this conception of Yahweh as a storm god, and then that led to Abraham, and Abraham's understanding changed, that doesn't mean that Yahweh was made up. It just means, I mean, it could mean that Yahweh was made up. I'm not going to say that it couldn't mean that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Yahweh was made up. I mean, even the Catholic Church and Christianity in general, the understanding of God has changed. You can see hints of the Trinity in the Old Testament, for example. You can see hints of it, but it's not explicit in the Old Testament by any stretch of the imagination. And yet Christians believe that God is triune and that he's always been triune. So has God always been triune, or did our understanding of God change as he has unveiled revelation to us? He's given us more revelation, and from that revelation, we look at it and we say, oh, it turns out that God is actually three and one, right? Three persons and one God, right? So my point here is just that our understanding of God changes. That doesn't mean that God has changed, nor does it mean that God was made up. This is just a really bad argument that atheists make. And we're going to see a lot of those in this video.
it has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality?
Yeah, it's changed because our understanding of God has changed, right? So just because our understanding of God has changed does not mean that God has changed. Do you think that people always understood the sun the same way that we do? Human beings used to think that the sun moved, not the earth, right? Now, obviously the sun is technically moving and the earth is moving or whatever. They're both moving through space, but people used to think that the earth was fixed and the sun rotated around the earth, and they didn't know anything about nuclear fusion and these sorts of things. So now our understanding of the sun is different. So does that mean that we should just say that we don't know anything about the sun because our understanding of it has changed? Or do we just say, yeah, we know more now about the sun, and people were wrong when they thought that the sun rotated around the earth and they thought that it was just a big ball of fire or something like that, right? I mean, we just say, yeah, it changed because we learned more about it. And in the same way, we've learned more about God. So that doesn't mean that we should think that God didn't exist. I mean, what even do you think this guy's argument is? We have to have all the information about God and be completely correct about it from the beginning, or we shouldn't believe it. It's just a bad argument, and this guy is acting like he was in seminary, and he's making terrible arguments. I have doubt.
It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem?
Pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Honestly, he should have been voted out a lot sooner than he was. I'm surprised they let him go that long. He wasn't doing very well. But a lot of the atheists probably thought he was doing well because they think that these are good arguments, and that's why he's still trotting them out there. But I would have voted him out after about 2 minutes if it were me. But yeah, bad arguments. If you were in seminary, dude, you should have had much better arguments against Jordan Peterson there. But let's go on to the next one.
Majority?
Yeah. Who is that? Is that Dean? I don't even know. Is it Parker or Dean? I'm just gonna call him Dean Parker because they look the same and I don't really care. But yeah, he's funny. Maybe we'll get to his part.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
This is so cringe when atheists do this. Oh man, it's so cringe when they do it. I just gosh, and like here's an obscure god. But do you know anything about this god? Oh, you don't believe in this god, so that's how I feel about your god. And it's just so bad. It's such a bad argument. Should I explain now why it's a bad argument, or should I let him get into it a little bit more? I think I'll explain now, and then I'll just reiterate it as it goes through. So imagine if I believe that O.J. Simpson has killed his wife. So we look at the murder of O.J. Simpson's wife, and we say that based on the evidence, O.J. Simpson is the killer. And then somebody who doesn't believe that O.J. Simpson is the killer says, what do you know about Eric Balboa? And you're like, nothing. They're like, well, I feel the same way about Eric Balboa being the murderer as you do about O.J. Simpson being the murderer. It's like, okay, well, first of all, I believe that there is a murderer and you're an atheist. So it really doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't matter that I don't know about every single God and I haven't looked into the claims of every single God. I don't need to do that. Just like I don't need to study every single person on earth in order to know or to feel like I can believe that O.J. Simpson killed his wife, because that's where all the evidence points to. So just because I don't know who Eric Balboa is or something like that, I know nothing about him, it doesn't follow from that I should be equally as uncertain about O.J. Simpson. And so if you don't know anything about O.J. Simpson and that murder, and you also don't know anything about Eric Balboa, and you're thinking, well, I don't know anything about either of these two things, so I just don't believe. Well, cool. That just means that you're ignorant. It just means that you don't know what the evidence is. But that has nothing to do with me. I know what the evidence is. I know what the evidence is for O.J. Simpson killing his wife, and I also know what the evidence is for Christianity being true. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know about Eric Balboa. I don't need to know about this stupid God that you're making up. So let's go.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting.
You're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting. Yeah, so if I feel very confident that O.J. Simpson has killed his wife, and there's only one possible killer, right? Like, let's just say, I understand that there can be accomplices and that sort of thing. I get that. But for sake of the analogy, right, there can only ultimately be one. There can only be one Highlander, right? But there can only be one God that is responsible for creation, right? Capital G God. There can only be one. We don't believe that there are like 50 or an infinite number of capital G gods. We believe that there is a creator, there's a necessary being, just one. And then there might be little g gods. So there might be like angels and demons and that sort of thing. Yeah, so the point here is, going back to the analogy, if I believe that there can only be one killer, and I believe that all the evidence points to O.J. Simpson, I don't need to know anything about other people that might be in the running, because all the evidence already points to O.J. Simpson. So by knowing that the evidence points to O.J. Simpson, that disqualifies all the other people automatically, because there can only be one person that killed O.J. Simpson's wife. Was I saying O.J. Simpson or O.J. Simpson's wife? If I was saying O.J. Simpson, I meant his wife, right? There can only be one killer, for the sake of the analogy. If all the evidence points to O.J. Simpson, then I don't need to know about everybody else on the planet. I don't need to know about them in order to disqualify them. The fact that all the evidence points at O.J. Simpson automatically disqualifies them. So if I understand Christianity and I understand that that's where all the evidence is pointing, I don't need to go and study every single religion on earth for the past 6,000 years, or however long you want to say that people have been inventing religions for.
Rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity?
that.
He should be voted out. This is such a bad argument, but these atheists are going to let him keep going. I would be raising my flag immediately. As soon as he asked that first question, I'd be like, get him out of here. This is bad. But there are so many atheists that think that this is a compelling argument, that this is a good argument. It just goes to show you like how bad the atheist arguments are, that they're letting him continue, honestly. And that he feels comfortable bringing this as an argument. He's bringing this as an argument against Jordan Peterson in front of millions of people. This guy.
That exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your
Yeah, and the answer is no, and that is what this guy is assuming. He's assuming that if you're ignorant of something, then you're rejecting it, which obviously is a total non sequitur. Like, there are all kinds of women that I have never met, and I didn't reject them because I married my wife. You know, I didn't purposefully think, not you. I looked at my wife and I said, you, right? She is the right one for me. That does not mean that I thought that every other woman on the planet is the wrong woman for me, right? I mean, it could be the case that my wife was never born. And if everything was the same, except my wife had never been born, I think I would have found another woman, possibly, that would be a good wife to me. So it doesn't mean that I am rejecting every other woman as a good wife for me because I happen to marry one wife. or because I'm ignorant of all the other women in the world and how good they are at being wives or something like that. It doesn't follow.
Presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated
Yeah, he didn't even answer the question or address what Peterson just said.
accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
he's really stuck on the Lono thing. Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no? He's gonna get Jordan Peterson. No, I don't believe that Lono exists, buddy.
I'm not going to answer that question.
I would just answer it. No, I don't believe that Lono exists. That doesn't mean that I believe that Lono doesn't exist. It's a difference there.
For the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something that
See, I mean, he's conflating. I just want to be very clear here. He's conflating this idea that if you don't believe in a particular God, then you have, that's like the same as not believing in any God. So, I mean, what is the prompt here? The prompt is that atheists don't know what they are rejecting. And atheists are rejecting all gods. They're not just rejecting like some particular gods. They're rejecting the entire idea that everything fundamentally comes from a mind. So there's a huge difference between rejecting most theories that JFK was assassinated with rejecting all theories that JFK was assassinated, right? Because there are a lot of theories about how JFK was assassinated, who shot him, where they were, all these things, how many shooters there were. But everybody agrees that JFK was shot, right? He didn't like have a seizure and then his brains busted out of his head or something. And, somebody like just dropped some bullets out of their pockets or something like that. We all believe that he was in fact shot. Isn't that true? So when we say that atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, it's to us like an atheist is rejecting JFK being assassinated. Okay? So there's a huge difference between rejecting the assassination of JFK, which to us seems like a fact. It seems like a fact that God exists. There's a big difference between that and rejecting a particular theory about JFK being shot, right? So if I believe that JFK was shot and I have my theory, and then you bring up some crazy theory that I've never heard of, you say, well, what about this theory? I say, well, I haven't heard of that, but I don't need to know about that theory to think that my theory is the best, because I think that my theory is the best based on the evidence that is present. So unless you want to actually make a case for why your theory is better than mine, what even is your point? And this is what this guy's doing. He's bringing up some obscure theory, some obscure God, and that's really not the point of what Jordan Peterson is talking about, because atheism is the rejection of God, like capital G God. So bringing up a particular God that is totally obscure and that nobody knows anything about, it's just totally irrelevant to Jordan Peterson's point.
that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true,
Atheists hate answering questions, generally speaking. They like to ask questions. They hate to answer questions. Yeah, it has to do with their ego, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's not all atheists, but it's definitely a trend that I've found where atheists, it's very difficult to get them to answer questions. Not all, but it's very common, especially online.
in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I
said
said I
it's
didn't
Lono.
know who Lona was. I didn't say anything about him.
We got some red flags going up. That should have been happening a long time ago. This guy's wasting their time. He's wasting my time. He's wasting Jordan Peterson's time. This is such a bad argument. He should have been voted out a long time ago. I can't believe there's only like one flag. Come on, guys, get him out of here.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't. But let me get to my even greater point.
Mhm.
You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity. And
If you have a degree in religious studies, why are you asking such a dumb question and why are you making such a terrible argument? There are people that have studied religion and I respect them and they're not religious or well, they're not believers in God and they can make way better arguments than whatever this is.
Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
I love this point. So if we take all of the religious people in the world, or at least the vast majority of them, and we figure out how much they know, the layman, right? That's going to ultimately boil down to the layman versus all the atheists who like to study this stuff because they want to tear it down. Why is it surprising that the atheist is going to know more than the average religious person? I mean, just think about that. Someone who is studying it to disprove it, they're going to study it more in depth than a normal person who just believes it. They're going to study it more in depth than a complete layman, obviously. So if you look at all of the religious people and you say, how much do you know? That's going to round out to be pretty much the lowest common denominator, right? It's going to round out to whatever the most ignorant, most people are very ignorant about stuff along these lines. Even though they believe it, they're ignorant about it because it's just not something that they spend their time studying, frankly. So, I mean, because you're talking about billions and billions of people, right? At least 1 billion people are Christians. Maybe I shouldn't say billions and billions, millions and millions of people, right? You're talking about hundreds of millions of people. So yeah, that's going to average out to someone who doesn't know very much about Christianity. That's what that's going to average out to. So it's not very surprising that atheists would know generally that they would know a bit more than the average religious person about their faith. That's not very surprising. Now, do you think that atheists know as much about Christianity as a Christian apologist? No. A Christian apologist is going to know more about Christianity and religion than the average atheist, right? Obviously. And that shouldn't be very surprising either. So it's just like, whoop-de-doo, Basil.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
And that's also true. Atheists are more religious than they think they are. They're trying to disprove religion because they think that their religion is true. Atheism is true, and I've got to disprove all the religious people, but they are religious.
Okay, you can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and
Yeah,
one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definition.
that's a charitable way of putting it, and it is true for some people. It just kind of depends who you're talking about.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would
You don't have to identify with a religious tradition or accept their foundational stories to be religious. You could be religious. I mean, think about this. Before there were any established religions, it would still be possible to be religious, obviously, because being religious is about having a sense of awe. It's about putting something above other things and, worshiping it or something along those lines, having a sense of reverence for something above others, right? And of course, if God exists, then God should be what we worship. It should be what we prioritize. It should be what we direct our attention to, because there's nothing above or higher than God necessarily. But of course, you could be religious even if there were no established religions or fundamental stories. And I think it's within every human to be religious, to prioritize certain things, to have values, to value some things above others. I think that that's very human, and so does Jordan Peterson.
I mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're
Let's
spiritual.
pause there. Has been voted out by the majority.
He should have been voted out within 30 seconds. I can't believe they let him go that long. Get out of here. Get out of here, you bum. Just kidding. He is a little bit of a bum. But...
Aha!
Okay, I don't know how that guy made it to the chair first.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Does that mean? I'm sorry. That might have been a little bit mean. But yeah, okay. He made he got there first. Good for him.
I'm Greg. Nice to meet you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotion.
Is that how you say polysemous? Polysemy? I don't know. I think different people say it differently, but I do like what this guy is saying. I think it is worth mentioning that different people mean different things when they use the word God. Obviously, that is true to an extent, but everybody, for the most part, it means that there's a mind. At the very least, that's what they mean. Except for maybe pantheists, right? But they're weird. Nobody likes them. So, yeah, this guy, it's worth saying, I guess, that different people mean different things by God. Let's hear him out.
State. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying.
You know what's really funny about this to me is that countless atheists will tell me that atheism is just the lack of belief. I stopped this in a bad place, didn't I? I keep doing that.
Not the other.
There we go. They'll say atheism is just the lack of belief in God. After I'm making an argument that atheism isn't true, or atheism entails this, or something along those lines, they tell me atheism is just the lack of belief in God. So that's what atheism means. But of course, that's not what I'm talking about when I say atheism means this or atheism means that. I mean atheism as in God does not exist. So if God does not exist, then atheism is true. And they feel like they need to correct me on what the word means to them, as if that's somehow relevant. So I wonder if this guy has ever done that sort of thing, where he has told somebody what he thinks atheism means, instead of just understanding that that's not what the person making the argument about atheism means by atheism. Because I don't think any Christian uses the word atheism to mean that you just simply lack a belief in God. They don't mean it where it's just your little mental state or whatever. Who cares about that? We're talking about metaphysics. We're talking about, does God ontologically exist or not? If God doesn't exist, then certain things follow. So it's interesting. I wish more atheists would understand what this guy's saying about the difference between moving and moving. You know, the Mona Lisa is moving, but in a different way than when I'm moving down the highway. In the same way, the word atheism means different things, depending on who's using the term and where. So when I say atheism entails that there is no meaning or no purpose or no morality, right? When I say that, I'm not talking about your personal mental state. So when you correct me, if you're an atheist listening to this and you say, well, atheism means this, the word is polysemous or polysemous, however this guy says it, right? Polysemous? I don't know how he said it, but yeah, it's polysemous. It means different things. You don't get a monopoly on the word atheism. Sorry, guys.
The other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God. And I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God. But I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that.
See, then you shouldn't be calling yourself an atheist, frankly. And maybe this guy doesn't call himself an atheist, but if you're only rejecting one particular type of God, but you're still open to a mind being responsible for everything, then you're not an atheist. You are an agnostic, right? So I don't know. I mean, you would be an atheist in respect to one God, I guess, or one type of God.
The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or
I
that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting. It's helpful.
That's such an interesting question, honestly. Why do they think that there is a theory for everything, a unified theory that explains everything? Why would they think that that would be the case unless everything has the same source? And even if it all has the same source, why would there be some sort of formula that could explain the behavior of everything, some sort of mathematical formula? That's really strange on atheism, that math would even correspond to reality in the first place, because mathematics is abstract, right? Like we just kind of like discovered math, but the world is fixed. Sorry, math is fixed. The world is constantly moving. It's in flux, and it's not abstract. We live in a physical world where things are constantly in flux and moving, and yet our physical world, which is not abstract, still obeys these mathematical laws, or it seems to. That's really, really strange given atheism. It's very, very surprising. It's like these two are being put together, right? I mean, it'd be like you find a car and then you find a blueprint and you look at the blueprint and it matches the car, but there shouldn't be anything. You didn't find the blueprint in the car. You found the blueprint in another country, but the blueprint perfectly describes the car that you're looking at. That would be really strange unless the person who made the blueprint also made the car, right? Or there's some sort of connection, like a mental connection between the blueprint and the car. So whoever made the car was looking at the blueprint when they made it, right? Then it makes sense. But it would be really, really strange if there's no mind responsible for the correlation between the blueprint and the car. That would be very, very strange. And in the same way, if atheism is true, it's very strange that math lines up with our physical reality. It's very strange.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah. Like, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes. But that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
I'm trying to define God, a God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back to stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
Interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you can imagine
Infer, right? I can infer.
from what principles?
Yeah, exactly. This is a good question. I don't actually know what it has to do with the prompt. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question because we all have to start with these principles. And how do we know that the principles are correct or good or valid? We don't. I mean, for example, a lot of atheists, they assume that if you test something, then it's likely to be true, right? Like if you get a good result from a test, then you think that whatever you tested is probably true. And that's just something that they believe, because how would you even prove that that is the case? How would you prove that if something passes a test, then it's true? How would you prove that without assuming the very thing in question, right? Like, oh, well, I'm going to prove that because here's a test to prove it. Well, you're begging the question, because if tests can't actually prove what is true, then using a test to prove that we can get to truth through a test doesn't work, does it? It'd be like if somebody says, well, how do you know that the Bible is true? And you say, well, right here in the Bible, it says it's true. Circular reasoning, right? So you can't use a test to prove that tests prove what is true or whatever. Can't do it. And yet we just kind of assume that tests have to do with truth, that if you test something and you get a positive result, then you can rely on that to be true. But to try to justify that, you can't do it. We just believe it.
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Where does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway. There's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make it.
So this idea that empathy has to do with morality, I think it has a little bit to do with morality, but morality is deeper than just this. I mean, because imagine, like, why is it that we feel when we were looking at somebody who is like in a vegetative state, in a coma or something? That's a human being in a coma, and we feel like it would be wrong to sexually assault them, right? SA, I guess. This is going on YouTube, so I should say SA. It would be wrong to SA them, right? And why do we think that? They're not going to remember it. They're not going to have any awareness that you did that to them. That's what we believe, right? And yet we still feel like it would be wrong. Why? I mean, is that really a matter of empathy? Because if you're empathizing, I don't want to have this experience, but they're not going to have an experience. They're not going to experience the SA, are they? And yet you still feel like it would be wrong. And I think that that's because human beings have dignity. That is why. And we recognize that human beings have dignity. And so it's wrong, even if the person isn't going to have a bad experience, it's still wrong to do. And I think that there are a lot of situations like this that don't really have to do with empathy. And yet there's still some sort of moral dimension to the question. So I think that this idea of empathy being foundational for morality is very shallow.
Ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right?
Mhm.
We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether this is
Empathy is just an ability too, by the way, and some people may use it at certain times and may not use it at other times. I mean, it's just a weird argument to me, because we can imagine somebody with perfect reasoning ability, like a psychopath or a sociopath. They can reason fine, but they don't seem to have empathy. But they could still understand that human beings had dignity, and they could act morally. That's possible. It seems like a lot of them don't act morally, a lot of psychopaths and sociopaths. But, those are usually the ones that we hear about, right? Because they've done something heinous or whatever. But there are functioning people in our society that seem to not have empathy, that seem to be able to act morally anyway. I don't know. I just think that this whole view where empathy is super important, it's really strange to me. I think that there's so much more to reality and to morality, especially, than just empathy.
Discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this is kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that way.
as I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way.
This guy is trying to talk because he wants to stay in the chair. He's trying to cut Peterson off. He's just so eager to keep talking so that he can stay in the chair and get his 15 minutes of fame.
And it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So
Look at him trying to cut Peterson off again.
to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again.
It's not that difficult. Either there's a mind that's responsible for everything, or there's no mind that's responsible for everything. It's very, very simple. I don't understand why people dance around this, and there has to be a big debate about it. Either there's a mind that's responsible for everything in existence, or there is no mind that's responsible for everything that's in it, that is in existence. If there's no mind that's responsible, then atheism is true. If there is a mind that's responsible, then theism or deism is true, and God exists. It's that simple, guys. It's not that difficult.
It goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of.
I don't like this move. I'm just gonna say because yeah, we have conscience, but does that mean that reality comes from a mind? Seems like atheism could still be true even if we have a conscience. Unless you're arguing that we can't have conscience unless there's a mind that's responsible for everything. But it's difficult to understand what Jordan Peterson is saying sometimes, or where he's going.
Kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right,
understand
but
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided
you
you.
just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting,
This guy really wants to answer. He wants to answer all of Jordan Peterson's questions. No, he just wants to talk. But he's going to get voted out pretty soon here, I believe.
understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented.
Okay, I really don't like this first claim that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. I think that there are much better arguments or prompts or whatever, or claims that you could make against atheism. Like, if atheism is true, there's no such thing as objective morality or whatever, or moral realism, to be more precise. But I mean, all this is going to end up doing is creating a semantic dispute, because, like, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by God? And I just hate semantic debates. And that's exactly what's happening right here. He's even talking about how the world is polysemous or polysemous or whatever. So yeah, it's just semantics right now.
Than
But-
your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking.
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
I made a
I
specific
characterized
point
it,
that
right.
God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
I kind of feel like the dude on the right is correct, and Jordan Peterson is kind of going into a semantic fog. I think he's given at least two different definitions of God. He was not defining God as conscience earlier, and now he's defining God as conscience. So this is a bit of equivocation as far as I can tell on Jordan Peterson's part. This is why it's easier to just say God is a mind that's responsible for everything, and let's talk about whether or not that is true. Should we believe that there is a mind responsible for everything? Yes, we should, because of things like morality and design and the ability for us to reason correctly and soundly and all this stuff, right? All these reasons. Well, let's have that conversation. Then we can talk about if we can make any other inferences about what sort of mind this is. Is it really intelligent? Is it good? But anyway.
Treating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do that.
Oh, they didn't vote him out. He just ran out of time. He wasted 6 minutes debating semantics.
Yes.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Yeah, morality and purpose cannot be found within science. It's such an interesting thing to say. I would want to ask Jordan Peterson what he means by that. Because science is just a method. It's a method that we use to discover things about the world. So if it is in fact the case that morality exists in the world, I don't know that we could discover that using science. We could maybe discover behaviors that are moral. And I think the first person is going to bring that up, if I remember right. But does that mean that science, does it mean that morality exists within science because science discovers moral behaviors? I would say no. Science is just, you form a hypothesis, right? You say, if this, then that, and then you test the hypothesis, you make observations, and then you get a conclusion or whatever, right? It's a scientific method. So that was a truncated scientific method or whatever, but yeah. So let's see what happens from this. They were all barely moving. I don't feel like anybody really wanted to get to that chair. I don't know why anybody even got out of their chair. They were barely moving. All of them. Nobody sprinted. No one was sprinting there.
There's Mr. Canada.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing
I think maybe the reason for that is because nobody wants to go first on a new claim. Maybe that's why. I don't know. They want to hear Jordan Peterson and get some ammo to use against them once they go. Who knows?
great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do.
Is morality subjective, Brian? I mean, are you going to say that morality is objective? Are you going to say that morality is objective? Because I've listened to this part of the video and Brian is about to talk about the behavior of animals, but animals' behavior is subjective, isn't it? So we observe subjects doing stuff. Behavior is something that subjects do, right? Do rocks behave? I would say no. It's only something that subjects do. So isn't morality subjective too?
See, we actually have examples of Neanderthals and older individuals found in the tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of the tribe were taking care of him. right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right, he actually freaks out, right?
Something that atheists just do not understand, even though I can say it to them until I'm blue in the face, is that describing animal behavior is not the same thing as accounting for morality. So it does not follow that if chimps don't like when you treat them unfairly, that these chimps are moral, because morality has to exist in the first place in order for the chimps to be moral or immoral. Otherwise, all you're describing is behavior, which is what he's doing. He's simply describing how chimps act, and then he's assuming that these actions are moral, which is question begging because he hasn't accounted for how morality exists in the first place. If there is no morality, then there's just behavior. There's just chimps doing stuff. There's no moral dimension to it. You've got to have a moral dimension in your metaphysic in order for the chimps to be able to do moral stuff and to understand moral questions. And he hasn't accounted for that. He's just assuming it. He's just assuming, oh, I see this behavior, therefore this is moral or something. It's very strange, but atheists do this constantly. They do it all the time. And you need to stop them right in their tracks and say, why is that moral? Where are you getting morality from? Is it right? Is it right or wrong objectively for a chimp to kill another chimp? Is a chimp immoral when he, murders his fellow chimp or whatever, or does X, Y, and Z? Is that immoral? And what makes it immoral? Why is it immoral? Says who? Where is the moral standard coming from? Because last time I checked, chimps are just being chimps. They evolved to be a certain type of way in order to survive. And they're just going along with the way that they evolved. They evolved to survive. And based on that, they behave in certain types of ways. And you're just observing the ways that they found to successfully survive. That's all you're observing. Why is there a moral dimension to it? It's very strange.
But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. Those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it pre-
Is morality intrinsic? I think value can be intrinsic. I don't know that morality can be intrinsic. I mean, I guess morality is either true or it isn't, but I don't think that chimpanzees are moral agents. When a chimp kills a human being, if we imagine a chimp beating a baby to death, we wouldn't think that the chimp was immoral or evil or something. We would think it was a tragedy, right? We would say this is awful, and we would have a funeral for the baby, and we'd probably shoot the chimp, right? But we wouldn't hold the chimp on trial and try to convict him or something. And we wouldn't say that the chimp was evil because it's just being a chimp. They don't have moral knowledge, right?
precede science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality.
It's just question begging. Just because social animals have to be social, that doesn't mean that morality exists. That doesn't mean that there's a right way or a wrong way. Are there ways that social animals should be if they want to survive? Yes. Yes. Just like there are ways that an eagle should be based on the way that it has evolved. I'm just going with the whole evolution is true thing for a second here. So if evolution is true, eagles have evolved to do certain things in order to live and thrive successfully, and they should do those things if they want to live and thrive. They should do those things. That doesn't mean that it's moral or immoral, right? Having the ability to do stuff does not mean that you have an obligation to do it. Where do the obligations come from? Why do human beings have the obligation to be social, to treat each other with dignity. Where's the obligation coming from? Do we have the goal? Sure, but that doesn't give us an obligation. So just because I have the goal to become a doctor, that doesn't mean that I am morally obligated to become a doctor. It just doesn't follow. It doesn't follow that I'm somehow wrong or immoral or evil if I become a doctor. Just like it doesn't follow that if I want to go and do something heinous, and like shoot up a school or something like that, that I have the obligation to do that, right? So this is just another thing that atheists don't understand. They're terrible when it comes to understanding moral arguments, and they just make really, really bad arguments when it comes to this stuff.
Or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regard.
It doesn't follow that they're being moral. It just follows that they're surviving. They're just another animal with a different survival strategy. There's no moral dimension, unless you're just saying that to be moral is to be social, right? But is that really what we mean? Like, were you social? No. I mean, when we talk about morality, we mean that there is a right way to act and a wrong way to act within an actual standard that we are somehow aware of. It's much deeper than just surviving and being social animals. It has to do with dignity, free will, purpose, these sorts of things. A standard, obligations.
Regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
It's not derived from the scientific process. It's the fact that
hang on a second.
we are social animals and we need that to exist as a group.
Yeah, he's not understanding what's happening right now. So when we look at animals, we see that animals act quote unquote morally or whatever. And that is not something that is within science, because science is just a process. So science observes this. And then we have to use morality. We have to have some sort of hierarchy of we have to have some sort of hierarchy in mind when we're doing science, some sort of hierarchy of values, right? So we value truth over falsehood when we do science. We value observation over non-observation or whatever. We value discovery over ignorance when we do science and this sort of stuff. But these values, they don't come from science itself. They come from outside of science, which I believe is what Jordan Peterson is saying here.
I
Right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals,
Mhm.
to the morality of chimpanzees.
Mhm.
They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science explains it. So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
Altruistic?
a complicated question.
But we
Yes.
see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals. And we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be,
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique. And that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can.
Atheists cannot admit that human beings are distinct from other animals. It's so funny to me. They always want to act like human beings are no different from other animals, and that it's like we just are just like other animals. Anytime you try and point out anything that separates us from other animals, they have to try to come up with some convoluted example of this other animal that, oh, well, don't you know about dolphins? And, chimpanzee, they do this. It's like, do chimpanzees do art? Oh, elephants do. I saw an elephant painting a flower. Haven't you seen this video? Okay, cool, dude. Do animals have a sense of justice? Do they try each other? Do they incarcerate each other when they do something bad? No, I don't think they do. I mean, human beings are obviously not the same as other animals. There is something that separates us from other animals. And it's just so cringe that atheists just can't admit that, but they just cannot admit it. And yet, you know for a fact that if they were trying to go somewhere and they needed a pilot, they wouldn't be okay with a chimpanzee flying their plane. You know what I mean? They wouldn't be cool with a dolphin doing it. So it's like, well, if human beings are no different than other animals, why do you want a human being as your pilot and not a dolphin, bro? Like, here's a dolphin who can fly a plane. Don't you want him? No. Why not? Because they're not the same. That's why.
Predict the future, or not predict really. The future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody.
And when I say they're not the same, obviously they're not the same. What I mean is human beings are very different from other animals. We're set apart in a very serious, fundamental way. It's not just that humans aren't dolphins. It's that we are very different from every other animal in very interesting, particular ways.
And so
hunting
actually,
animals.
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay,
No, but they can perceive the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
voted out by the majority.
I'm surprised they voted him out so quickly. I guess everybody really wants to go and defend science, so they're just voting people out so that they can have a chance at the chair. I thought that guy was doing okay. He brought up a tiger or whatever. I don't know why they voted him out so quickly, and they let other people who had way worse arguments that were just dog water sit there for like 10 minutes. I don't get it, but whatever.
Thank you, man.
good man. Yeah.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality.
And that's correct. Yes. You can't get morality out of science, even if you think you can. Sam Harris talking to you. Yeah, it is definitely the domain of religion.
Yes.
Science just tells you how things work. It doesn't tell you how things should work. You're studying the observable universe with science. You're figuring out how things operate. That doesn't tell you how things ought to be. So science has nothing to say about what our obligations are. Even if science can tell you all about how human beings interact with each other, that says nothing about how human beings ought to interact with each other, right? Because if I'm a scientist and I'm observing human behavior and I'm finding that human beings kill each other all the time, well, I say, okay, well, it turns out that human beings kill each other all the time. So does it follow from that human beings ought to kill each other all the time? Because that's what we find when we observe human beings. Or what if I find that human beings are super jealous of each other, right? Like I go and I study human beings and I find that every human being I look at has felt envy or jealousy for another human being multiple times in their life. So human beings are just jealous. Does it follow from that human beings ought to be jealous? Obviously, the answer should be no. So science can't tell you how human beings ought to be. It only tells you how human beings are. It can only study the way that things are as we find them. It doesn't tell you how they ought to be. But morality is about what ought to be. It's about values. It's about what is good or what is bad. Science can't tell you any of that stuff. It can't give you obligations or tell you what is good or bad. None of it. It just tells you the way that things are physically, basically, and you can get patterns. You can find patterns from science. And that's about it.
Exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori. Right? That's why we define science as value-free. That has
honestly, Jordan Peterson shouldn't even have this as a claim because it's so obvious to anybody that knows anything about this. But it is worth saying because atheists refuse to understand that this is the case. And that's why you've got a bunch of people all running towards the chair and voting out the first guy after 3 minutes, because even though this is obvious to everybody else, atheists don't understand this. They think that it's like science is God or something. And they think that science can get them all the stuff that they want. It can get them morality, it can maybe even get them purpose. Who knows? But if atheists had a clue what they were talking about when it comes to this stuff, Jordan Peterson should have never used this as a claim because it's just so obviously true. And Why would anybody even want to disagree with it? Every single person that was sitting here, every butt should have stayed in their chair when Jordan Peterson made this claim. They should have said, okay, we agree. Like, what's to argue, guys? What is to argue? Morality is in science? Really? No, it's not.
It's to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me myself, I am a former young Earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality.
Do you think his hair was this long when he was a quote unquote Christian? Interesting. I wonder. I bet it was. What do you think?
Evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So
Imagine being a man with a ponytail. Like, how embarrassing. I'm sorry, but bro, cut your hair.
in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of the slave? Isn't that immoral?
Here we go with the Old Testament. What does this have to do with the prompt? Look what the prompt is. Morality is not found within science. And we're talking about Old Testament slavery. You can make any religious claim as a Christian, and atheists are going to bring up slavery in the Old Testament, I swear. It's like they just, it's their only argument. I mean, it's not their only argument, but it is their favorite argument. And it's just so cringe, but let's go.
Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality.
That's
And
right.
the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And wouldn't you
slavery.
say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just
No, I think
Christianity?
it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans.
Yeah, the ideas developed just like our ideas of God have developed. Jordan Peterson is right here. So there were the seeds of certain things within Christian teaching, and then those seeds grew into trees, which produced fruit. And one of the fruits of Christianity has been the abolition of slavery. So just because the first Christians didn't abolish slavery, and it took like 1700 years or whatever, let's say 2000 years, to be uncharitable, sooner than that, but it took a long time to actually get it done, but the seeds of it were always there. When you have a seed, you don't get fruit from a seed. But if you plant the seed and the seed grows and it matures into an apple tree, and then you provide water to the tree, you're going to get fruit from that tree. You're going to get You're going to get apples, right? In the same way, the potential for getting rid of slavery was always within Christian teachings. It was always there. But it just didn't get fully realized until later. It didn't become actually, an actual fruit or whatever. It didn't ripen into that. It took time. It wasn't an immediate thing. So that's what Jordan Peterson is getting at here.
Of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
And what do you
of
mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they
and-
did do it based on culture.
Humans get better according to what? According to who? According to what standard are human beings getting better? Can you tell me that? Like, where do atheists come up with this crazy standard of what is good and what is bad and this objective standard? Because is it better that we've abolished slavery, or is it worse? Is it more? Are we now more immoral? What about abortion? Is that an improvement? I mean, is any change just thought to be good? Like, if we went back to slavery, would that be good? Is it only good that we moved away from slavery because we were doing slavery and then we changed to not doing slavery? If we had been not doing slavery and then now we were doing slavery, would that be thought to be progress according to atheists because there was some sort of moral change? I mean, it's just so weird to me. I feel like atheists just do not think about this stuff at all, and they don't have any idea of what they mean when they use these words like, oh, we've improved or we've progressed. It's just empty rhetoric.
In history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too.
Dean Parker's got his flag up. He's ready to go. He wants to get in there. He wants peace.
So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
everyone,
Bible. Based on the
that's-
Bible, they
that's
looked
much
at it
less
and they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery.
Yeah, but the
based on
main
the Bible.
thrust of Protestant.
Yeah, the Deep South tried to use the Bible to justify their way of life. So therefore, the Bible can't have had anything to do with the abolition of slavery, except for the Christians that actually were responsible for the abolition of slavery. But yeah, cool. You found some Christians or people calling themselves Christians who were still pro-slavery because their entire way of life depended on it, because that's the way that the world worked at the time. Whoop-de-doo. What's your point?
Thought in particular was stringently
Yes.
against slavery,
Which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
Humans, it didn't have anything to do with the beliefs of the humans. Humans are just doing stuff, and it has nothing to do with their religion or their fundamental beliefs or any of that. It's just humans doing stuff.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
Yeah, did the women that were doing women's suffrage have some sort of ideology that they were working from that were causing them to do the things that they did, or was it just women doing stuff, bro?
I mean, it was driven by humans. Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
evolving
There is a
morality
specific-
based on the culture that
This is such a bad argument. I'm embarrassed for this guy.
within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with
I think
women's
that
suffrage
did
as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal.
I just want to say really quickly, there are a lot of people like this young man with long hair who are quote unquote Christians, and they discover a little bit of information about science, and then they think, well, I guess the Bible isn't true because it looks like the earth is old, or it looks like evolution is true. There's all this scientific information or evidence that evolution is true, so therefore the Bible isn't true. And then they go to atheism, and it's like, bro, do you think maybe you should not do that? Do you think it follows that if Christianity isn't true, that therefore atheism is true? A lot of people, they just kind of reason this way, like, well, if Christianity isn't true and if evolution is true, then therefore God doesn't exist, and that is a total non sequitur. What you should figure out first is whether or not God exists, and then reason from that to which religion is true. Because if God exists and if you believe in good and evil, then that means that we are held to a standard, a moral standard. And that means that God does care about our world because he's given us this moral information, this standard that we are supposed to be adhering to. So that means that deism is not true. Theism is true. That means that one of our religions in this world is true. So which one is it? Because it's not atheism. But, people like this, they're like, well, I lost my faith in Christianity, so therefore atheism. And It's like you didn't think about this very much, clearly.
Movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our
Define
experiences,
higher.
which is what is best for all
Is it
people.
driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time, and I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve with morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, "This."
God influenced slavery, therefore science has morality in it. Do these people even know what the claim is that they're supposed to be addressing?
Is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
all
If
human.
You really have to write down the claim and just hold it in front of the atheist the entire time, or they're just going to go completely off into their own, argument, and it's going to have nothing to do with the original claim that you were making. You have to be very persistent.
Human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
if humanity decided,
Oh wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
well, you can say it bolstered it
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant
which
Christians.
evolves over time.
Yeah, get him out of here.
Well, it was great talking with you.
He's
sir.
talking to you
Bad
guys.
arguments, really bad arguments.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Okay, that guy was moving. That guy was pretty fast. I think I would have gotten to that chair much faster than even he would have, but it wasn't a bad effort right there. Good job.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
I like this. Honestly, he's wasting a little bit of time, but I prefer atheists like this. This guy's a bit older. Honestly, he's way too old to be an atheist in my view, but still, at least he's acting like an adult, unlike some of the other people we're going to see if I get to them.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
It's weird how there's this juxtaposition between science and religion. I mean, science is not religion, but you can do science and be religious. And actually, it doesn't make sense to do science if you are an atheist, frankly. All atheists are basically borrowing presuppositions that only make sense on theism in order to do science in the first place. So it's not like you just have to choose between science or religion, but science is not the same thing as religion. That is very true. And yes, morality is the domain of religion, not science.
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay,
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a
Okay.
definition, right?
okay. If there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary.
What the heck does this have to do with the prompt? The claim? What is the purpose of human life if there is a God? What does that have to do with the claim?
Upward self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's
Okay.
a good way of thinking about
What
it.
is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At minimum,
get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can, okay. And so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
You mean
without
avoiding-
God,
you mean avoiding
avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that
No, it doesn't, because the claim has to do with what is within science, not about what human beings can do here. I mean, he's just saying if human beings can do a thing, then does it defeat the claim that morality is not found within science? And no is the answer. It does not defeat that claim, because it just doesn't follow that if all humans get together and decide on a common goal and do something, that therefore morality is going to be found within science, right? Come on.
it doesn't, you circumvented my initial definition, because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise.
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist.
Yeah.
It really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God.
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If it's
going to come at your expense, would you still follow it? If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
You should. You absolutely should. Doing the right thing is the thing that ought to be done for the sake of itself, not for the outcome. And this is something that I take issue with sometimes when it comes to Christians, because a lot of Christians, it seems, are Christian because they want to go to heaven. But that's not a good motivation. The heaven is the cherry on top, but you shouldn't eat a cake for a cherry. You should eat a cake because you enjoy the taste of cake, and you shouldn't serve God because you want what God is going to give you. You should serve God because God is good and because it's the right thing to do. It's that simple. So if it were the case that I was going to go to hell, whether I served God or not, I ought to still serve God. And I like to think that I would still serve God, because that's just the right thing to do. And we should do what is right. It's right to serve God, whether or not I get my cherry or go to heaven or any of that stuff. So yeah, that's the answer to this question, is you should still do it, obviously.
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ. Right? Because they were required. Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time?
So when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So
none of this stuff has to do with morality. I mean, morality is there something that is right or wrong in accordance with a standard? Like, do we have real obligations or don't we? Am I obligated as a husband and father to take care of my family? If I abandon my family, have I done something wrong? That's what we mean when we talk about morality. It doesn't have to do with the outcome. It doesn't have to do with what we're trying to achieve. It has to do with what we ought to do right now based on certain principles that are binding on us somehow. And obviously they are binding on us because God has authority over us, because God owns everything. And so he is able, as the owner of everything, to make the rules. And when we are not in line with those rules, we are immoral. And those rules are good and set up for our benefit, the same way that I set up rules for my children. When are my children being bad? When they're disobeying the rules that I have established. Why did I establish the rules that I established? Because I care about my children. So what are those rules? Don't go play in the street. If you're going to go into the street, look both ways before you go into the street. Don't stick forks into the outlets in the house, right? The rules that I set up are meant to protect the things that I value. So I might even say you're not allowed to write on the walls because I value my house. And you're not allowed to hit your brother because I value your brother. I get to make the rules because I own the house. I'm in charge. God gets to make the rules, and the rules are good because God cares about us. The rules I set for my children are good for my children because I care about my children. They are meant to safeguard my children.
You and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and a justification? I mean, it's ultimately psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can just debate.
Okay, well, so here's
So
my
I
position.
said that God, among other
I'm
things,
actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without
Who cares? Who cares? Seriously. Why does this matter? We can believe something and not have absolute certainty. People do it all the time. You can believe something and live your life in accordance with that belief without having absolute certainty. You think this guy's married? I bet you he is. Does he have absolute certainty that his wife will be faithful to him? No. Did he have it when he married her? No. He believed that she would, though, right? Obviously. Otherwise, he wouldn't have married her. And he acted on that belief. You can act on that belief and live your life according to beliefs without having absolute certainty, without having even 98% certainty. He believed and he was sure enough in his wife's character that she wouldn't, but he could be wrong and he knew it. I guarantee you, if this man is married, he would agree with me that his wife could have been unfaithful. He could have been wrong about her character, and yet he did it anyway. He decided to risk it all in order to be married to that woman. He didn't have certainty. You don't have to have certainty in order to believe something and to make decisions that are going to alter your life based on that belief. You don't need certainty.
In the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
And
come
what
to
I
that
ought to
conclusion?
do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective.
What determines what you ought to do? Who says what your obligations are? You? Society? God? Where are these obligations coming from and why are they binding? Why are you obligated to take care of your family? Even if you don't want to take care of your family, even if you want to play video games all day or something, why do you still have the obligation to take care of your family? Why? Where's that coming from?
Perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved move or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I reject
definition of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
And
hierarchical
that is what
structure?
the quantum
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
are. Some things, I think that some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
He didn't do that bad. All right. Here comes Dean Parker.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, It would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying like description.
Notice how he decided to go with 5 minutes left. So he's let Jordan Peterson basically give a lot of his position out there. That way he could have more information. He's a strategic thinker, and he thinks that he's really good at debate. Dean Parker does.
Of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure, but I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists, and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good.
You reject the one that you hate.
Perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
It isn't.
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of.
The claim has to do with whether or not morality and purpose is found within science. Dean Parker.
Of notion of God that typical.
He should have been corrected right there by JP.
Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
what typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in all.
How is that relevant? Like what typical Christians say? If you're talking to somebody, you need to deal with their position, not with what most people say. So if I'm talking to an atheist that agrees with me that meaning and purpose and morality don't exist if God doesn't exist, which is rare. Most atheists will not agree with me. Then I'm not going to say, well, most atheists disagree with you, so therefore I'm going to argue against what they say instead of what you've just conceded to, right? I'm just going to say, okay, so you agree with me on all that. Now let's move forward in the conversation. So it doesn't matter what most Christians are saying. It matters what Jordan Peterson is saying, what his position is. You should argue against his position once you have it.
All knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He has a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
when
you say you believe?
How is that circular?
I agree with Dean Parker here. I hate to say it, but when you believe something, that means that you think that something is true. So if you go to the casino, do you believe that you're going to lose? I do. Right? I don't gamble anymore, but I used to. If I went to the casino, even though I don't have any kind of certainty that I would lose, I still believe that I'm going to lose, even though it's almost a coin flip. But I know that the house has a slight edge. So I believe reasonably that I'm going to lose money. Could I win money? Sure. Do I think that I'll win money? No. I believe that I'll lose money. So when you have a belief, it just means that you think that a proposition is true. If I go to the casino, do I think that the proposition I will lose money is true? Yes, I do. So I believe it.
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by
that? What? Why is this guy? What is he wearing? What a dope. Oh my gosh. What is this? Yeah, I don't agree with Jordan Peterson on this. If you believe in something, you stake your life on it. No, you stake your life on certain beliefs. You don't stake your life on all of your beliefs. Some beliefs are more serious than others. Like if you told me I had 5,000 blades of grass in my backyard, I might believe that, but I wouldn't, that doesn't mean I stake my life on it. And I still don't know, like, why would you wear a tie with this, bro? This just looks bad. Who dressed you? This guy needs a girlfriend. Sorry.
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So
how would you define belief? Something you say?
That's why I explained. Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life.
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me?
I don't understand why Jordan Peterson is putting himself in this situation. Just admit that a belief is when you believe a proposition to be true. Why do we have to stake our lives on beliefs? Yes, beliefs can be serious, but not all beliefs are serious. Some are, and some need to be evaluated very carefully. It depends on the nature of the claim, you know. But some beliefs are very trivial, right? So my neighbor might say that their child is sick, and I just choose to believe them. You know, if you say, okay, do you think that your neighbor was lying when they said that their child is sick? I'd be like, no, they're probably telling the truth. I believe it. I don't need to stake my life on that in order to believe it. Some beliefs are trivial. Now, some beliefs are not. And I think Jordan Peterson is just thinking about the really serious beliefs because he's talking about theism and Christianity, which that is very serious. So, but not all beliefs are that serious. Come on.
I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them, would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation again.
Jordan Peterson should have done everything he bloody well could to have avoided this stupid line of questioning that is now trapping him into acting like he doesn't understand a hypothetical because he couldn't just admit that belief has to do with whether or not you accept a proposition as true, tentatively or otherwise. Just saying.
It's a hypothetical, and it's
you
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play.
Dean Parker loves these gotcha questions. He's the ultimate Mr. Gotcha. It's so cringe, frankly, but whatever. Yeah.
Games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it.
Yeah, he is, but whatever. He did catch you.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them
give
in
up
an
on
attic.
that.
What does this have to do with the claim? What does this have to do with whether or not morality can be found in science? Why are we talking about beliefs and Nazi Germany? Can I say Nazi on YouTube? Probably not, but yeah. What in the world does this have to do with the claim? I mean, they're saying it, so I can say it, right? But yeah, nothing. It has nothing to do with the claim, the original claim.
That line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask
It's
you.
just a basic
yeah, yeah,
hypothetical
like you-
where you're,
like
you
if you-
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question
What's
for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist?
What in the world does that have to do with anything?
Like, so you're
Why are you
anti-fascist?
asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up.
They think that Dean Parker is making such a good point right now. It's so funny. Like this has nothing to do with the actual claim. It really doesn't.
To show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you
Right.
would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not
the
what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's it
corner.
impossible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Yeah. My next claim is that
Yeah, I think that Jordan Peterson is wrong for defining belief that way. I mean, because obviously people can accept a proposition and not be willing to stake their lives on it. So what do you call that when someone does that? When someone just accepts a proposition, but they aren't willing to stake their life on it? What is the word for that if it's not belief? So, but I don't know why that mattered for the sake of the claim. I think that they were off topic from the beginning. And maybe that's because nobody wanted to deal with the actual claim or something, but I don't know. Are these guys not given these claims ahead of time so they can think about what they're going to say? I feel like they probably are given these claims ahead of time, but I don't know.
everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Everybody worships something. They just don't all do it in the same way.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Did she beat him? Let me see that again. Let's see. He let her win.
Hi.
He
Hi there.
didn't want
I'm
that
Dina.
share.
So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever.
So I think we're going to do two more because the next person, he's the one that had the big highlight or whatever. So I think we're going to get through this one and then we'll do one more. And then if everybody really enjoyed me going through this, then maybe I'll do a part 2 and I'll get through the rest of this.
Whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you know what? I think we're just going to skip to this other one because I've been going at this for about 2.5 hours now. So let me go to the next person because she has some good questions, but none of it really was very pertinent to anything I want to talk about. So she did a good job. I thought she was very respectful, but I've been doing this for a while and she didn't really have any pushback or anything. She's just trying to understand his position. So, and she went for a while, didn't she? Look at all that. So, yeah. Okay. This guy. All right.
And Christian based on simply just acting in that
Yeah,
way.
Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really.
She was probably my
Very
favorite.
thoughtful.
I feel kind of bad for skipping her, but as far as listening, she was my favorite because she was very open-minded and listened and asked good questions. But as far as what I want to talk about when it comes to bad atheist arguments, it's not very valuable for the sake of this video. So, but she did a good job. I want to be clear about that. And
Hey, Dr.
this
Pete.
guy is what, a D tier atheist? Well, we'll see how he does.
Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Dan.
You say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
What does that have to do with the prompt? What does that have to do with the claim? Nothing.
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
It says everybody worships something even though they might not know it. What does that have to do with Catholics and Mary? Catholics worship God, and they wouldn't say that they worship Mary. Catholics pray to Mary, but they don't consider that worship. I know a lot of Catholics.
Worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not.
Not everybody has the same definition of worship. So according to the definition that is being offered here, for the sake of this conversation, you would say that Catholics worship Mary, but Catholics think that you don't worship something unless you sacrifice to it. So the Eucharist is viewed as a sacrifice to God. And so Catholics would not say that they worship Mary. They have a very high view of what it is to worship. But under Jordan Peterson's definition, which does not say simply to sacrifice to, if you attend to something, Catholics absolutely do worship Mary based on that definition, but Catholics would not accept that definition. They have a very high view of worship. This is a mistake that a lot of Protestants make as well. They have what they think of as worship, but they don't define worship or think of worship the same way that Catholics do. So it's a semantic dispute. It's not actually a dispute about what it is to worship necessarily. It is about what worship actually is. But yeah, it's something that a lot of Catholics don't understand about. Something a lot of Protestants don't understand about Catholics. But none of this is relevant.
Not put her in the highest
But you would
place.
put it that way.
No.
You just said it. You're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay,
He's trying so hard to ask a gotcha question. It's just, oh my gosh. We're back in, 2010?
a hierarchy, but within
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to. Do
Prioritize.
Do Catholics?
The problem with Jordan Peterson is he does not like to get nailed down to stuff. He doesn't like to get nailed down to definitions. He doesn't like to get nailed down to beliefs. So he puts himself in bad situations because he is really evasive. He should have just said, based on the definition that I've given, Catholics worship Mary, but Catholics don't have the same definition as I do, so they don't see it that way. But based on the definition that I gave, they do worship Mary. And just leave it at that. But now he's got to let this kid, get this big moment or win on him because he has a lesser view of worship than Catholics do. And he doesn't either know that or he's not present enough to say it. And, this stuff is exhausting, doing all these debates with all these people. So can't fault him too much, but it is what it is.
Like sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said
Catholics do prioritize Mary over all other human beings. She's the queen of heaven. I'm pretty sure that's not a controversial statement. I'm pretty sure that a Catholic would not feel inclined to correct me unless they are calling Jesus a human being. And they don't prioritize Mary over Jesus. But aside from Jesus, Mary is number 2. And it's not even close. If there are any Catholics that watch this and I'm wrong, please correct me. Because I don't want to straw man your position, but I believe that is absolutely correct.
there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
And now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because
I do want to say I didn't know until about 2 years ago that the Immaculate Conception had to do with Mary and not Jesus. Do y'all know that the Immaculate Conception is saying that Mary was conceived without sin, not Jesus? Obviously, Catholics believe that Jesus was born without sin as well, but they believe that Jesus also that Mary also had to be born without sin. I didn't know that for a long time.
you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it is. Jordan Peterson, just say I'm a Christian for sake of the argument, but he did say earlier that he doesn't like to call himself a Christian because he takes the title very seriously, which makes sense because, I mean, imagine somebody calling you, imagine that you have a very high respect for Kung Fu or something like that, some sort of martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And somebody says that you're a master of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and you've been doing it for years, but because you know so much about it, you're very hesitant to talk about yourself in that way, to call yourself a master. So you would probably say, no, I'm not a master of it, right? And I think that's how Jordan Peterson feels about being a Christian. To be a real Christian is to do something that is almost impossible in his view, which is to follow Christ and to live the way that Christ taught. And none of us really do that. So I think if we're being super charitable, that's where Jordan Peterson is coming from in this conversation when he says, I'm not a Christian, or I'm not sure that I'm a Christian.
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
Yeah, well, either Jordan Peterson is a Christian or he's not, but that doesn't mean that he's going to call himself a Christian, right? So either I'm a master of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or I'm not, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you which one I am. Because if I'm humble, then I'm not going to think that I am. But a lot of other people might call me a master, but that doesn't mean I'm going to have to tell you that I'm a master. So I do understand where Jordan Peterson is coming from here. And yeah, he just didn't explain it very well. And this kid is, kind of a snot-nosed brat. Maybe that's an ad hom, but it's whatever.
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Yeah. What's the point of that? He got his little gotcha, and then he disrespects Jordan Peterson, and I guess he's really proud of that. Do you think he's going to be proud of that in 10 to 20 years when he grows up and he's a mature adult? I don't think so. It's just unfortunate. Maybe they should have an age limit or something, or an age restriction, so that these young kids don't just completely embarrass themselves. I mean, it is embarrassing. A lot of people think Jordan Peterson got embarrassed, and he did get a little bit embarrassed as well. But I would not want to be this kid. I wouldn't want everybody seeing my face being a snot-nosed brat to Jordan Peterson and to be known for that. Maybe that's just me. I mean, he is an adult. He put himself in the situation, and he did what he did. So anyway, I think with that, let's see, play just a little bit more. Yeah. This guy, he's like, oh, you owned him so good. He's so impressed. Look at him. Atheists are funny. Yeah. All right, so this has been pretty fun. I did not make it all the way through the video. I did about half of it. So if you guys enjoy this video and you really want me to do the next one, then leave a like or comment and ask me to do another one. If there's enough requests, then I will go ahead and cover the second half. But yeah, I hope that you all enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all this. I think that Jordan Peterson did an okay job. I think he could have done a better job. I'm not going to sit here and say I would have done a better job, because who knows? And I do think that these debates are pretty unfruitful in general, but hopefully listening to me and listening to Jordan Peterson, you could understand a little bit more about what's being said and where these atheists are not making good arguments and this sort of thing. And you can learn a little bit about how atheists think and how they debate by listening to my responses and everything. So hopefully this has been somewhat instructive and you enjoyed it. And if you did, let me know in the comments. And with that, I think that I will go ahead and sign off. So you all have a wonderful day and God bless.